no.
I'm awake. The music woke me up.
I had one that I was looping and I'm like, let's do something different. Double T wants to raise the roof.
Yeah, I'm awake. I'm awake now. Thanks. I needed that. The getting dark early really, oof, really hits
Yeah.
me where it hurts.
Yeah. Little dance music will do you good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
How are we doing this evening?
Good.
And double T is good.
Double T is good.
Good. Good. Good.
He's looking for his next costuming opportunity.
Oh, well. Hmm. I mean, it is turkey time, so
Yeah, we're contemplating a turkey costume for sure.
he would be a cute turkey.
There were turkeys in my yard the other day.
There
Random turkeys in my yard.
there have been turkeys in my yard on Thanksgiving Day.
I'm pretty sure these turkeys were like on the run from the turkey farm near us.
Oh, we have,
They were
oh my
like,
God.
oh,
We have a ton of wild turkeys around here. I feel like
yeah,
what's like a herd of wild turkeys called? Does anyone know? I don't know.
I
But we
don't
have
know. I
like
feel
some
like
like
that's
herds.
yeah, that's something that my husband would know. He went out and photographed them. They could have been wild turkeys. I don't know. But yeah, it was pretty funny.
It would, yeah, if they were on the run from the turkey farm, like I wish them luck.
Yeah, yeah. They looked at the calendar and they were like, all right, y'all, here's the plan.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, should we get into some announcements? I lost my
Yeah.
page. So, we are going to be heading into the final week of our book. Um, we're gonna finish her up next week. So our last chapter here that we'll be doing on the 19th, the 19th.
Yeah,
The
I know. It's insane.
we're gonna finish it up page 75 to 208, and that'll be all she wrote on this book. And that is also means it's the end of our last book of the year. We've read a lot of books this year.
We have,
I was
and then
looking
add
the other
in,
day, it's a lot.
yeah, and then add in what I read, on mine. Like we've gotten a solid amount of literature into our quilty brains.
Oh, I never would have read this much on my own ever.
Yeah, it's challenging. I mean, who has the time, honestly?
Well,
Unless
something,
you have peer pressure.
but think too about how much that we read and then like massaged, by discussing and then like things that we thought we were going in the right direction and we weren't, and then or things where someone led us down another path to look at
Hmm.
things or places we didn't know existed, or like we didn't know that Michigan State University had a buttload of quilts.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
doing it
yeah, and I
together
mean
definitely has its perks.
we've also had that spooky and this always happens when I'm reading books on my stream, that spooky feeling of like you learn a new thing and then all of a sudden it's coming out of the woodwork and you're like, would I have not noticed these things if I
Mhm.
hadn't read this? Or
Mhm.
is it just the universe is like, hey, you're into this thing, I'm gonna give you more.
Or we keep making ties between books and people and events, and
Hmm. And lectures we go to and
that's true. And
yeah.
scholars and
Hmm.
people that we meet. Because, like, don't forget, like, we've had like three authors on our stream this
I
year.
know.
That's a lot. And this year is our 1 year anniversary.
Hmm.
That's a lot. It's a lot has happened in a year.
I know, and it's
And
gone by so fast.
well, and with that, let me show everyone a lot is happening this month, and we've just added something. So, let me, where's my thing here? I don't like this new thing that Zoom has done. It's not easy to find things anymore. So is that good? Is that up?
Yep,
Oh,
I see it now. Yep.
so we've got all of our stuff going on here. We've got needlework nights tomorrow, 7 p.m. and stuff we're talking about.
Uh, crochet hooks, tatting shuttles, knitting needles, and maybe a few lace bobbins.
Anything hooky, lacy, like it's all, we were just talking about that before the show. Like, hey, even this thing, and she's like, maybe even this. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, all the things. And then And then on Thursday, we're doing a dual stream between here and Cake TV at 2 p.m. Eastern, where we're going to do a watch party of the newest Material Culture series video from AQSG. And our friend Mia Clift is going to be on here live with us because it's her episode that we're going to watch. And
Yeah, that'll be fun.
I have remained true to my word. I have not watched it.
I haven't either.
Okay. I told Mia the other day, like we're brand new. Um, and then what we've added here is on Sunday the 17th, we're gonna do one of our little Stitch and Bitch sessions where we just chat about what's going on. I just recently held a private event at the New England Quilt Museum that was really fun, and I want to tell everybody about it. And I have been doing some handwork that
Very exciting.
yeah, Stephanie taught me how to English paper bee. So I have some things to show. Stephanie showed me something before the stream that I made her put away because I want to hold it off. So we're going to look at that too. And like just gab. Like we haven't had a gab in a while. And that, we have our last book here. We can talk about the other things that are going to go on in the end of the month because we're going to be looking at like some exhibits and things like that on these other days we have down here. So, there's that. And then also, please don't forget that on Steph's stream on the 21st, she has Mary Fonz as a guest, and that's going to be a big deal. So, like, you definitely don't want to miss that stream.
Yeah, definitely don't miss that one or watch the replay when you can.
Okay. So, getting that out of the way. That's really all I have for like any like major announcement stuff, unless you have something very pressing that
I don't, I mean, it seems like we've got a lot going on and we do. But it's also kind of business as usual, It's just trying to keep the days from flying by.
Oh, and they really are. Like the getting dark really screws me up. By the way, Jan said the group of turkeys is called a rafter or a flock.
Oh, well, I had a rafter of turkeys in my backyard.
Now, rafter sounds really close to like raptor, and like turkeys can be really mean. So I'm thinking of like Jurassic Park turkeys now.
And they did look kind of Jurassic. They were, at least three of them were female turkeys. And so, they're not like, they kind of long, skinny necks and they're,
Mhm. Wait, what was that? They're like, what? Yeah, that was interesting. A for effort. Actually, I will just say one more thing about turkeys. I had a friend once who was on their way to work in the morning one morning, and there were a bunch of turkeys, and this was more closer in the city. And they were like, so we're just like sitting there in these turkeys, and I'm like starting to like honk at this turkey, and he just looks over at me and he's just like and then just like didn't move. And I was like, that's awesome. And you totally deserved every minute of that.
yeah, that's pretty funny. Turkeys are, they're an interesting animal. They're a very interesting bird.
And most
They
people
they
don't
do,
realize that they can fly.
yeah, yeah. And I've never actually seen one in flight, although I
I
do know
have.
they can fly. They're just a strange bird. And,
I
you
tried to
know,
pet one once in my yard and it flew up into this massive tree.
they strike me like chickens. Like chickens can fly, but not very far. And I mean,
I don't
you're
know
not
if
going
they
to
can
see
fly far.
flocks of chickens migrating. I mean, turkeys don't.
That's true. That's true. That's true.
Anyway, so shall we get into it?
We shall get into it.
So we were chit-chatting a little bit before we started. Um, and I think both of us kind of, I mean, we love this book. There's
Hi,
lots of things
Druid.
that we've learned. And hey, Jewett, lots of things we've learned, but also there's a little bit of bummerness about this book, I think. I think that, you had mentioned how that first chapter is so long. And, it's almost like it could have been its own book,
Hmm.
and then
Because it touched on every little bit of every one of these chapters pretty much.
right. And I'm noticing things from these chapters are coming up again. And it's like they certainly are coming up in a greater detail. But
It
you
makes me
know,
wonder if actually like, and I'm not saying this is true, but it almost looks like she may have written that let's say really small book and then put in all of her references, like all of her reference essays that she used to write
Yeah,
that
maybe. I don't
chapter.
know. Or I don't know,
Mhm.
or the essays were solicited for the book and then she wrote that beginning part. I don't know. So anyway, I mean, I feel like I understand. I think that the goal was to reference as many native populations as she could
Mhm.
that have, that make quilts.
Mhm.
But I think what was probably a little bit disappointing to me is in some of them, like, I mean, we get to the Yupik women, their story is amazing.
Mhm.
Like, I'd never heard of this, and I'm just like, this is amazing. I love this. But then other groups are, it seems like, well, they quilt, but it's not like this really important aspect of their cultural tradition. It's just, yeah, and we make quilts too. And I'm kind of like in that aspect, they're kind of like ordinary Americans who like to quilt.
Mhm.
You make quilts for gifts, you make quilts to put on your bed. But unless you're like like you're quilting for exhibition or you're quilting to sell your quilts, they just sort of, they fade into the background and they're not to say they're not important, but and I feel like some of these native groups, like that's really what the quilts are about. It's just it's a hobby. Some folks might make some money off of it, but it's no
Mhm.
different than, your average American household that is into quilting. So for that, I was a little bit disappointed in that, you know, I did learn some great stuff though.
Yep.
I've learned some history and some cultural stuff that I had no idea. So
Mhm.
um I have to say as I kind of wish this book had been structured differently, but I have learned so much so far. So
Mhm. Well, let's
how we-
discuss how Yupik women spoil their cloth, the seal
yeah.
party quilts of the Nelson Island
Yeah.
Eskimos.
So may I reference before we jump right in, if we could reference page 24, where we have Kupak Kate, who is the Sunbonnet Sioux version of the for the Yupik people. And she's so cute and she's all bundled up in her little parka and she's looking at native Alaskan flowers.
Ooh, native Alaskan flowers.
Yeah, I love her. She's so cute. Um, so this was interesting when I read the title of this was Women Spoil Their Cloth. I know in the past seen information about different ways that they deal with the meat from whale hunting and seal hunting and how, in some, and the question is like how much of this is actually done today versus in the recent past. I feel like probably particularly this community, Nelson Island, probably is very different today than it was in like what was this 1990. I don't know why I can't
Well,
remember the date
90
of this book.
anything is a good
Yeah, this is
time from
1990
now.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1997. I should remember that. That's my son's birth year. So 1997, 27 years ago, things are probably pretty different in a lot of these communities, but I mean, not the least of which would be this community up in Alaska.
Hmm.
Um, but so I had heard where I'm going with this is like, I'd heard stories about how, some of these smaller or more like rural communities that are still living kind of primitive, like, like other rural areas of America. But they would bury seal meat or, do different things with it. And I know I've seen something about where there's, I don't know if it's a delicacy or something, where it's like buried and spoiled. And so I was thinking that when I saw this, like how the women spoil their cloth, I was like, what did they do with it? Like, are they soaking it in like seal oil and like, I don't know. And then I realized they just mean spoil as in like, I
Hmm.
guess rip it apart. Is that spoiling it? Or is
That's
the spoiling about like treating other people, spoiling them? I don't know. Like, I'm not sure when they say spoil what that means. Did you get a good sense of that?
no, I mean, I feel I was also kind of as thinking that there was something they were going to physically do with the cloth,
Hmm.
but I gathered it was the same kind of scenario where they're ripping it. Uh,
Hmm.
but maybe it is more about spoiling their neighbors. I don't know.
Yeah, this tradition was so interesting to me. And as I'm reading it and I'm like, oh, the cloth, and then I'm like, gum, diapers? What? But I'm like, these are things that people enjoy or need.
Hmm.
And, if you could shower these gifts on your neighbors when you
Hmm.
have, when your family has been the first with the spoils of the kill,
Hmm.
and reading that this is a population of people that have great respect for the animals that they're slaughtering for food. So I mean, you can imagine, from modern times all the way back, that this is a big deal, being grateful for the food that you have, especially in a place that's not particularly like, on a good day. I think that parts of Alaska are still really difficult because it's cold, it's hard to
Absolutely.
get things.
Absolutely.
So, even before, I mean, even with the trading companies and all that stuff, it's still, I mean, even today, there's parts of Alaska where if they want stuff, they have to fly it in on a plane.
Mhm.
And I mean, parts of Canada, the Arctic parts of Canada are that way too. And I just can't, I don't like the cold, so I can't imagine, living like that. But anyway, the point I was trying to make is that I loved this story because it's about gratitude and about the gift of giving. There's
Mhm.
something so wonderful about giving to other people.
Mhm.
And they make it fun, by like throwing stuff at the at the crowd.
Yeah,
I
I
mean, it's
like
just
so for those that haven't read, basically my gist of a seal party is it's a celebration of when men and boys bring back the first seal that they've killed
mm,
in that year. And basically it becomes like this big celebration of gift giving, where they kind of, dis distribute the seal meat and fat
mm.
out to the community. And then they also do other things, like Steph said, diapers and gum, and then strips of fabric that they just throw out to people. And um there's a little blurb here on 139. um it's right above it. It says, after the seal is divided, the store-bought goods are also cut up. Cloth strips are torn. String is cut, boxes of cookies and tea are opened, packs of gum are undone. Then the party begins. It says, Katie Moses described the seal party as she remembered it when she was little. I'd run to invite ladies, all excited. They would jump and leave whatever they were doing, even hot tea. The
Because
seal
who doesn't
party,
love a giveaway?
yep. The seal party comes first. With good hunting, they are continuous day after day. It is a belief that women celebrate the first mukluk, bearded seal of the spring, so their husbands and sons who catch their first seal will gain as successful hunters. It symbolizes the sharing of thankfulness. During the springtime, excuse me, the village comes alive with living sounds. The bright sun beats down, reflecting on the white snow, blinding the people at the same time and tanning anybody who is enjoying the springtime. Rushing to the house where the husband caught the mukluk, you would think that the women were racing on the 4th of July. Usually the women want to get the best position. And they get these strings of fabric, and then with these strings of fabric is what they make their quilts with.
Hmm. But all that we have shown here is a quilt top. So,
Mhm. And then
um,
here's a photo on 141 of women distributing seal meat during a seal party on Nelson Island in 1980.
and then the party, or I guess the fight through the dance, that the dance event, then being this, that's where there's more cloth. That's where the quilts are made from cloth that's been distributed, or that cloth that they get will then be torn up and distributed next time. So they're like, there's this recycling of goods or handing around of goods. I still have so many questions about this though. I'm wondering, like, it wasn't clear to me, like, these household goods, are they collecting them all year round, or is the springtime like they go and buy? Are they buying it like again, like there's a lot of information missing here. Just like it's probably didn't seem important to the essay writer, but I'm just like, I want to know more about this. I wish that this book had been like this story, maybe the Lakota giving ceremonies and like the Hopi baby naming ceremony, like more information on stuff like
Well,
this.
I mean, but you can go now and further research seal parties.
Yeah, absolutely.
But no, like the dances that you were just mentioning, I
Hmm.
really like, because there's this emphasis on these dances, because we mentioned at the beginning, where do they get these strips? So later in the year, they have these dances where they lay out bolts of fabric. And then from the bolts that's where they get their strips of fabric. It's when they're laying out these bolts. And then afterwards, quilts are made and given out at ceremonies, and that's meant to complete a symbolic cycle.
Hmm. Yeah, but well, so there's one thing here. It says cloth given to the older women and the seal party, thus reemerge as a quilt in the midwinter dance, sewn
Mhm.
together to celebrate the grandchildren. And the goods cycling through. And I love the idea of like older women or elders are given like the best and the leftovers
Mhm.
because they are both honored, and the giving gifts to honor them, but also because they are the ones who then further distribute items,
Mhm.
so they'll know in their family, like, oh, there's been new grandbabies born. We need the diapers. We need the,
Yeah.
whatever. And I'll distribute those to the people in my family that need them. So, this is like so cool,
Mhm.
and I mean, I think about, there's communities that do, giving things to people that need it.
Mhm.
Um, but this celebration of just joyous, like selfless giving is pretty neat.
Well, and the investing in the health of your community, you know,
Hmm.
by the sharing of the kill.
Hmm.
Because the lone person can't thrive without a healthy
No,
community.
not in this harsh environment. Absolutely. And I mean, that's part of this like true community. Like when you talk about, communes and that kind of like this is how it happens. You
Mhm.
actually have to have a community that is in their heads and their hearts bought into this culture. This is why your average, hey, we're going to go live off the grid often doesn't work because you've got, you know, a group of people that are like not all from the same background but they think by having this common, interest in living off the grid, that's going to keep them together. But there's this story I think is a perfect example, like kind of like the case study of how to live communally.
Mm.
Right. That, and it really goes back to, it's like their culture, this ingrained culture that,
I also am
you know.
very curious as to what seal tastes like. Has anyone ever eaten seal? Druid, have you eaten seal? Like, just very curious.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess seal. I don't know. My guess is it tastes fishy.
Wow,
or
you're like crack the
or
code with that one.
I mean, or like chicken, because if
Because
but the
everything
seal
tastes like
eat.
chicken.
Yeah, because everything tastes like chicken. But the seal eat a lot of fish, so I would guess that their flesh is pretty fishy. They're fat. I mean, they're storing, the fat stores, what they eat. So it's got to be kind of fishy.
Oh, Druid has not
Druid says
eaten.
rich, gamey, and fatty. Yes, that would probably be about accurate.
Or it's gonna be like chicken of the sea and tastes like chicken.
I don't know. I mean, you think like thinking of a seal. I mean, I hate to. Gosh, seals they tug at your heart with their big eyes, but then you really see them and they're kind of like icky animals. They're, some of them are just big and oh,
Oh
they
yeah, it
they
didn't.
really remind me more of cattle.
Yeah, I was gonna say it didn't say what kind of seal. There's different kinds of seals.
Well, it's a bearded seal.
Oh, did it say bearded seal?
Yes, the muckluck is a bearded seal.
What the hell's a bearded seal? I don't know that I've ever paid attention.
I can't think of what they look like. I know the elephant seals are the really heinous looking
Yeah, those
ones,
those
and
those like big weird noses.
the big beard nose. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not. I can't remember. We'll have to look it up. Inquiring minds want to know what
Is
a
it
bearded seal.
is it a cute seal or not?
Let's find out. Uh, because this is. Oh, okay, yeah. They're what you think of when you think of a seal.
It's a cute seal.
The whiskers, the
Oh.
big eyes, gray, soft looking gray. Yeah, their babies are probably very, very adorable. But they are the largest species of Arctic seal.
Hmm.
They grow to lengths of 7 to 8 feet and range from 575 to 800 pounds. So we're talking about small cows, basically. Small water cows.
Wow. Can you imagine? what it must be like to try to kill one of those things. Because we're
I,
not, we're not out here running around killing cows with our. But anyways,
yeah, let's not go there. Let's steer this back to quilts. I have mad respect for the communities that that harvest animals with great respect and use them, for their subsistence. But I don't
do
want to
you
get into
do you
that.
have anything else to discuss about seal parties, or did you want to move on to the next?
Yeah, let's move on. I mean, I loved this. I didn't really note anything in here other than Kupa Kate, the Sunbonnet Sioux version
Mhm,
of their quilts.
mhm.
Just because the whole story is fascinating, but also I need to know more. So put a
Put a
pin in
pin in
that.
it.
I'm gonna look up seal parties.
Yep, put a pin in that. All right, so moving on, I to page 145. I might butcher this name, but the quilters of Akwesasne is what I
Yeah, I
think it
think
is.
that's it. Yeah.
But then we talk a lot about Mohawk.
hmm And
So,
it's interesting, like, and I know I said early on, I was like, I couldn't even figure out where they were talking about. I just realized that they said Adirondack Mountains at the very beginning. Because reading this, I was like, where are these people? Where are they? And I just could not remember, like,
hey, we've been talking about a lot of people in this book. I can understand
yeah.
if you're
But
getting a
I
little
feel like
kerfuffled.
this area is really confusing, like the upstate New York and kind of like in New England, because you have I think a lot of tribes that live close together.
Mhm.
And you had like kind of warring situations. You just had like I guess cross tribal marriage or whatever. However, um, so I think that a lot of times when they describe these communities, I get really confused because you're
Oh my
talking
God,
about
imagine
Mohawk.
if you were looking at a map of, like, if you wanted to when people want to acknowledge the land they're
hmm
on, and you look at the maps, it's not like a clear dividing line. Like there's a lot
Yeah,
of, and there's,
yeah.
like I
There's a
said,
lot of overlap.
there were a lot of tribes up here because the
hmm
climate is, you know, good.
Yeah. Well,
That's
Mid-Atlantic too. I mean, down where I am too, there's, Maryland was Piscataway, but they are part of the Algonquin.
Mhm.
And I mean, Algonquin is up all the way up, and then, you've got Iroquois and Mohawk too. So I'm like, bleh. And I think Algonquin's like the umbrella, right? And then you have like Piscataway and Mohawk, and I think
Let's say
I'm probably wrong.
I am not well versed on like greater.
Yeah, I think I'm super probably wrong about that, but I have this great book that I read like probably 30 years ago. I need to dig it out because it does get into like the minutia of understanding like the tribal lineage.
Well, and remember at the
It's
beginning of this book, she made it clear that she was not going to
yeah,
get
because it is
into
complicated.
that. Yeah,
Yes,
because
because it
it's
does get
very
complicated.
complicated.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess I was gonna say like this particular essay I think was, again, one where there was interesting things about these groups, but this was not a situation where Mohawk people necessarily, the quilts were not such a big deal. They were just part of their everyday life.
Yeah, the this one note that I had made is that this particular group is the first group really we're seeing in this book that are treating quilting just more as their everyday hobby than as
Mhm.
something with like real traditional ceremonial significance. And then like on 148 I had written down elder Mohawk women say they quilt to keep their hands and minds occupied.
Yes, I like that.
The
I
one
noted that
very
too.
significant thing in here though is the Freedom School quilt
Yes.
auction.
And that I think she had mentioned in the Marsha MacDowell mentioned in the earlier part of the book. I
Mhm.
still like it blows my mind. And so that's what on like page 149.
Mhm.
The Freedom School quilt auction was started in 1979. Each family with children enrolled in the school must supply a quilt for the auction. Um, so it's either make a quilt or buy a quilt. And I think this is probably one of those situations where, there's some of these tribes may be supplying quilts to each other,
And
right?
here's some pictures from um those quilt auctions. And the Freedom School that they're talking about is not a government funded school in any way. There's no taxes that pay for it. It's totally funded by the community. And
It's a reservation school, isn't it?
yeah, and they teach traditional Mohawk language and customs and things like
Hmm.
that. And those pictures were from a quilt auction in 1996. It says quilts are hung on clotheslines for visitors to review before the auction begins. The activities of the day also include sales of other crafts and traditional food. As the auction begins, quilts are offered for sale. Quilts offered for sale are held up while the auctioneer encourages bidders who are assigned numbers to raise in the air. Many community members gather for this important local event. It doesn't ever say, though, which I wish it did, about how much these quilts tend to go for in these auctions, like these community auctions.
Hmm. Yeah, I think there was, I don't remember if it was this, it might have been the chapter about the Hopi baby naming, but I know it said somewhere in one of these chapters they talked about how if they sold a quilt from their home, they would get less money for it, whereas if they sold it at, say some type of um like organization or place where that they would sell like native crafts, that they would get more money for it. Which I mean that's that's the way of selling quilts, I think. Um, One thing that I have noticed in here, and I noticed it in the Yupik chapter and this chapter, is there's often reference to making blankets. And I'm wondering if, because as quilters, if you're a quilter, you
I'm not.
bristle when people call it a blanket, you know? Um, and I mean, I don't care because it's just one of those things like,
I
a
care
blanket.
depending on the way that they say it. Because
That's
sometimes you
true.
can say it kind of pejoratively, and I'm like,
It's just a blanket, yeah.
yeah, like, why don't
Um,
you make that blanket then?
yeah.
Anywho, go ahead.
But I'm wondering if there is something about that because blanket is, and I'm thinking about kind of wondering with each of the native languages and culturally like what blanket means versus what quilt means. I mean, quilt is not something that would have been in their lexicon for
Mhm.
millennia, whereas the concept of blanket may or probably was. So it's just interesting to me, and particularly from the perspective that there are other people writing these chapters. These are essays written by other people. It's not Marsha MacDowell
Mhm.
in most of these. And so I'm kind of wondering, like, I'm just curious about that choice of word. I've just noticed it throughout here.
Like, are they using it interchangeably or are they talking about something else?
Well, no, not talking about something else. I mean, it's so on page 148 at the bottom, it says quilts represent many things to the Mohawk people. And you had read this part. The elder women say they quilt to keep hands and minds occupied. In addition to making blankets to keep their family warm, they
Oh,
make baby and wedding quilts. So they're talking about quilts. But
mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, they just would use the terminology interchangeably.
Hmm. I hadn't really thought of that because some of the other essays reference actual, like, the Pendleton
Right.
blanket making
The
and things like
Pendleton
that.
blankets, the woven blankets, and because
Yeah.
I think in some cases those predated the quilts. Like
Hmm.
quilts have been used to replace like some of those Pendleton blankets,
Yeah.
the trade blankets. And I mean that's relatively speaking, I think that's a 20th century thing, like early
Hmm.
20th century. Those Pendleton blankets were from the 19th century, and yeah, it's just an interesting progression, and I'm wondering if that's what's behind it, like quilts replace blankets, or if it's just like the terminology just doesn't really matter,
Sure.
you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a fair question.
Hmm.
I would tell you if
I
it wasn't
also,
fair.
I also, thanks. I also like where they reference quilt designs have increasingly incorporated traditional Iroquois symbolism.
Hmm.
The tree of peace turtle. He is from the Adirondack region.
Oh, is he really?
Indeed. Because his full name is Tawaneus.
Oh,
Tawaneus Testudinis. So yes,
wow.
he's got a history.
That's a fancy name.
We just call him Double T. But so tree of peace, turtle, and other clan motifs, eagle, the three sisters, which are corn, beans, and squash, And then some quilters have become well known for specializing in one pattern. These symbols are also sometimes used in contemporary fashion, occasionally with traditional quilt designs of Amish, Hawaiian, Sioux, and other cultural groups.
Hmm.
So I think it's interesting also like what they're taking, just as, I don't know what's the right way to say it because I don't want to say like, oh, they just quilt, but their use of quilting. I think it's interesting what they take for inspiration for how
Hmm.
they make and use their quilts.
Hmm. True story. I don't have anything else for this chapter.
Well,
The most interesting part for me was the quilt auction.
yeah. So, Hopi baby naming.
Hopi baby naming.
Yeah. The baby naming ceremony was really interesting, and I we'll get to that in a minute, but it was a little bit different than I thought it was, like what happens, what it's about. Um, but first of all, the first thing that really fascinated me is about it's on page 154, is that the Hopi they were cotton farmers.
That was very interesting. But before we go to that, I just want to let people know we're talking about a totally different part of the country now. The Hopi are in Arizona.
Hmm.
And just an interesting little tidbit on 153 to point out is that the climate, which is, it was referencing in here getting very hot in the summer, getting very cold in the winter. Um, the climate may have contributed to the fact that the Hopi have largely remained with their culture intact. Because if a missionary doesn't necessarily want to hang around,
Hmm.
or lots of them don't want to hang
Yeah.
around,
They're
um,
not trying to move you because you already live in a really crappy place.
yeah, they don't want to. And it archaeologists have dated one of these villages to AD 1150.
Hmm.
So they're generally thought to be descendants of ancient cliff dwelling people, and they're considered like one of the continuously inhabited areas uh,
Hmm.
where they were not driven out. So I think that
Yeah. Yeah.
is an important tidbit to mention. And then
It
the
is.
fact
Yes.
that before missionaries showed up, as they were doing cotton. So it wasn't an influence
Hmm.
of missionaries. And that's the first tribe that we're discussing where at least that tidbit has been brought up, which I
Hmm.
was very like,
Yep.
interesting. I wouldn't have considered Arizona to be a place to be growing cotton. So that's very intriguing.
I think if you have a method of irrigation, cotton is actually pretty easy to grow. Like
Hmm.
it's very it's a forgiving plant. Um, and yeah, that was really interesting to me. I was like, "Oh, like cotton was just not introduced." You know?
Hmm.
It was something that they had that was part of their culture.
Hmm.
And also the fact that men were the primary sewing, weaving, all that. And
Yeah.
and the fact that this is a matrilineal society, it's interesting to me. It's kind of like everything about the Hopi is like flipped on its head, right?
Hmm. Yeah, the men were doing all of the sewing, the clothing making, the ceremonial wear. And then there's a
Oh, so Druid has seen cliff dwellings when she lived in Arizona, but she
oh.
did not live in a cliff dwelling.
I was gonna say
I,
Pixar didn't happen, but
yes.
um there's a comment in here where basically once missionaries showed up, that the gender roles were basically reversed,
Hmm.
and women were the ones taught to um sew and everything. And then there was, I know I must have written it down, where basically, let's see, oh, 156. Quilting was a popular way early missionaries attracted people to the churches, um,
Hmm.
an enticement to convert the
Yeah.
Hopis to Christianity.
You want more fabric? Come back. Come back.
Mhm.
I mean, it's brilliant. But it's also kind of crappy because the goal was to dismantle their culture.
Right. It wasn't
Like,
like
oh my God, matrilineal men sewing, we've got to stop this nonsense. I mean, you can hear the missionaries now.
it really, I mean, it's one of those things where it's almost like everything in history can have a crappy history. Because when we think about quilting now and the way that it's passed on, in kind of this European American culture, it's like, let me show you how to quilt, or grandma, will you teach me? It's not like, come over here and learn how to quilt so I can make sure to erase whatever culture you got going on there because I don't like it. Like I want to take over
Yeah.
your society because it was saying in here, like, while they quilted, they would read Bible verses and whatever. And that's like, wow, that's a nefarious way to teach someone, a skill that today we think of as feeling homey and inviting and comforting, being used, in a way to erase people's identities.
Yeah. And force religion on them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, although in the later years, quilting bees were generally made up of women, but in the early years, they had them for men.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love to have seen that. And I think what they reference 1900s, the churches held the quilting bees for men. I would love to see that. A bunch of men around a quilting frame gossiping and yakking.
I mean, I will tell you, it's not from reading books about Native Americans, but in my years of reading anthropology ethnographies there was one from like Papua New Guinea, one from a remote tribe, I think in like Africa or something like that. Reading these anthropologists who went, were there living there with them for like 3 years and stuff, describe, one of them was a male anthropologist, another one was a female. The male anthropologist, he basically said that the men, and I think that was the Papua New Guinea tribe, he was like, they gossiped like there was no tomorrow. The guys would get together in like a lodge like they do now, like the man cave. But he was like the gossiping went on. He was like, it was like being at home with my mom and her friends a clucking hens. Like it was just as
That's
bad.
funny. Yeah. Yeah. Also a note, because I was used to reading about, the Mormon missionaries.
Hmm.
Mennonite missionaries are mentioned in here with the Hopi. That's also interesting to me because I know that there was some Mennonite movement across the country. Um, and I know, our friends in Pennsylvania have told us some interesting stuff about some of the Mennonite efforts, Mennonite aid societies that make quilts to send to Africa. Like there's all kinds of charitable missionary type stuff they do. But I was surprised to hear that they were heading out to Arizona,
Hmm.
or at least this one couple headed out to Arizona to start a Mennonite mission. That was interesting.
Hmm. Here's a
Um,
picture here on 156 of one of these sewing schools. I just love these old photos. Is that coming in good?
mhm. Yeah, I can see it. Um,
This is Martha's Sewing School. Martha Moser Voth, wife of Mennonite missionary H.R. Voth, taught Hopi women to sew in her weekly sewing and quilting bees held at the Mennonite Mission Church at Orabi, Arizona, circa 1893.
mhm. Now, moving along with the missionaries, we also have the Baptist missionaries on page 158. And as I was reading this, I was like, oh my gosh, I know all about this. So the White Cross blocks
Mm-hmm.
and support and outreach extension of the American Baptist Church, members rolled bandages and stitched quilts to be sent to Indian and foreign missions. My grandmother was a member of a Baptist missionary circle. And I remember when she would have missionary circle meetings at her house, and all these old ladies would be sitting in dining room chairs all around her living room, rolling bandages.
Really?
And yeah, I remember being like 3 or 4 years old, kind of crawling around on the floor, and some of the women would like, I could roll from the other end while they were rolling, and other women would be like, "Stop touching her." Um, and when I think about it, like, I think everything they were doing, I don't remember ever hearing anything about Native Americans. I'm pretty
Hmm.
sure this was all foreign mission type stuff.
Hmm.
But, today I'm thinking, like, okay, so this was in the 70s. They were using like cotton sheets, like they were tearing cotton sheets into strips to make these bandages. Like that's what they were doing. And I like when I read this, I was just like, oh my God, where were they sending these? Where were they sending these? And I was part of it. Like and it makes you think like they obviously my grandmother was a very, very much a do-gooder. And I just like, it kind of squicks me out a little bit to think that this sort of missionary work that's very icky that we're reading about may have been part of my childhood. I mean, I certainly hope that
Another one of
my
those scenarios where things that make us feel warm and toasty aren't
Mhm.
always having a history of toastiness for other people.
Well, exactly. And again, the foreign missions kind of thing. I mean, again, oh gosh, who was warring in the 70s? I don't even remember, but I'm fairly certain that these bandages were going overseas and not, you know,
Hmm. Hmm.
but nonetheless, like, what kind of awfulness was associated with that? I don't know. I don't know.
You were a child, I absolve you.
Thank you.
Like, yes,
My
you were a
hope is
child.
that it was simply supportive things that were being sent and not any kind of mission trickery. I'll leave it at that.
Go on to the
Um,
baby naming, which you loved so much.
yeah, so the baby naming. So, you know what, it's very kind of complicated. So they're like before the baby's even born, or I guess the harvest time that's closest to the birth of the baby, they choose these 2 ears of corn that are like the mother corn, perfect ears of white corn that are selected and set aside. And they're placed next to the baby in the bassinet or cradle and stay with the baby until the naming ceremony because, corn is such an important, aspect of the culture.
Hmm.
And then, I mean, well, so first of all, the 20 days, right? Is it 20 days?
That they're in
Um,
isolation.
yes, they're in isolation for 20 days. And I'm thinking, this is probably a good thing to be in isolation because when people are around you kissing your brand new baby and you're like, please don't give my baby like tuberculosis. Like this baby is brand new. It has, so I think that 20 days it's nice to have, mother and baby like, kind of kept aside. And then there's ritual hair washing and bathing. Love that. Um, and then the baby is washed. I mean, it's all this just like beautiful, like I don't want to say pampering because I think it's got this kind of ritual aspect to it. It's not like,
Hmm.
we're bathing you for your comfort. It's, there's a ritual aspect to it. But I mean, again, it's like cleanliness and it just sounds nice. And it's women taking care of women.
A lot of cultures
Um,
have these, like,
yes. Yeah. Yeah.
these
Is
times
it?
that you
Yeah.
ritualistically separate.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember if it's Korean or Chinese culture where it's kind of the same thing. Like
Hmm.
you have a baby and it's your mother or your mother-in-law comes and you're kept warm, dry, you eats the soup,
Hmm.
and it's like a really long period of time. And it's like, wow, we don't have that culture. How many people I've known who had a baby and were like, well, gotta go back to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cheryl Sandberg
Like
had a
3 days
baby.
later.
Yeah, Cheryl Sandberg had a baby on Thursday, back at work on Monday. Like,
Mhm.
thanks for ruining it for everybody, Cheryl Sandberg. Oh, that made me so mad when she did that. I was like, you have set women back. Anyway, but let me step off my soapbox. But yeah, so there's all of this, and there's lots of prayers, and then there's the giving of the quilts. And every person of the friends and family who come, they offer a blessing and a quilt, and they give a name.
Hmm.
And as I'm reading this, I'm like, what? Like, I mean, does cousin Bernice want her to be named Bernice? And Nadine is like, oh, no, no, no. I think that, Julia's back. I'm like, what? And I realize these are special clan names. These aren't just random names. But what ultimately happens is that the mother and the paternal grandmother take the child. I mean, there's the morning sun. It's like a sun ceremony, and they speak the names. And then I think it's from there that the intent is that one of those names sticks.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really interesting. And of course, then they eat cubed sheep, and I'm like, ew. I'm all for the cornmeal and whatnot. Love some cornmeal products, but yeah, the cubed sheep I could have done without the sheep stew. But anyway, I just thought it was this really beautiful ceremony, and this all of this, the friends and family are coming and bestowing blessings, and they have this very early and important entry into this child's life.
And
I thought
it
that was really
also
cool.
had mentioned that it was very common for these babies to get 8 or more quilts
Hmm.
and names.
Yes, yes, yep. And
And
when
that
they said, I know they said in here somewhere like the baby literally disappeared. Yeah. So 159, the baby almost disappears under a mountain of quilts in this warm and endearing celebration. I love that.
so it's the baby, it's like instead of the princess and the pea, it's the quilts and the baby. Like the baby. Can you feel the
Yeah.
baby under the quilts? All right, you can sit here.
I also will say that the Hopi butterfly, the butterfly dance is, and the butterfly dances they appear across multiple traditions, multiple clans.
Mhm.
Um, in fact, I think the Piscataway, one of their public dance things that they do a butterfly dance, and it's a very beautiful, there's a shawl, and I mean, as you can see on the quilt, the other quilt shows the butterfly maiden.
This is one quilt that's related to the butterfly dance, and then here's the
Hmm.
other.
The butterfly maiden quilt, yeah. Um, and I mean, butterflies are great. They're a cool thing on quilts. And also, if you've ever seen a butterfly dance, it's with a shawl. And I mean, you could see this picture of the butterfly maiden. That's not
Mhm.
exactly what it looks like from what I've seen. But it's very colorful, and the shawl is used like wings. And it's just, it's again, it's a really beautiful thing. And so I'm guessing the Hopi kind of pioneered the butterfly. I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't know enough about the cross tribal customs, and but I do know that the butterfly is its traditional symbol in um other groups.
Well, should we quickly move on to the
Yeah.
last
Rosebud quilts.
thing here? This article was interesting. It's Rosebud Quilts building a museum collection, creating an exhibition. Um, it's interesting because throughout this whole book, whenever we've been looking at stuff, we've been seeing over and over and over again that clearly there's a very large collection of these native quilts at Michigan State University. And here we have an article that's about a completely different other quilt collection
I
in
know.
another museum, which I did look up. But it's by appointment only to get in there. There are
Oh,
no
really?
photographs allowed.
Ooh.
Yeah, it says right on their page. And it's like a missionary related museum,
Uh-huh. Hmm.
but that there are quotes.
I'll just go ahead and make my harumps.
Mhm. Your rumps.
Um,
I need that, Stephanie. Just I'm gonna say this here to immortalize it so that other people like Druid and Jan, whoever else is in the audience, can hear. I need now another like Stephanie quilt or a Sue with a little blurb with your word that says, I'm gonna say my harumps. Okay?
okay.
It could be double T maybe, like, but just like this little blurb, I'm gonna say my harumps.
Harumph.
Right? Druid, you think that's a good idea, right? Jan, I know you're on my side. Be on my side. Jill's birthday's in January. Okay.
All right, Corny. Um, so I know you like the pictures. So there's
I
two cool
do.
pictures in here. Mrs. Frank, four horses. Um, and I think this other lady is unidentified. Um,
This
but
lady here that I'm showing is
That's Mrs. Frank Four Horses.
Yeah, 1930s photo of Sioux woman on Rosebud Reservation, South Dakota, shows her draped in a pieced quilt. You want me? And then we've got
Yeah, I
this.
don't know. I know you always love to show these, so
I love them. And by the way, Jill said, our Druid said, Jill's twisting my arm. So this other photo I just showed is unidentified Lakota quilter works outside her tent on a patchwork quilt with star blocks circa 1930.
now here's what I've got to say. Can you see her needle? That is a
That's
gigunda
a
needle.
large needle.
You know, our friend Mod Art Quilts, she sews a lot, like she quilts with yarn, and I know she uses these, you know, big hefty needles. And when I saw this picture, I was like, this poor woman is sewing with like a carpet needle. She's stitching this
Well,
quilt.
it actually looks to me like maybe she's tying it,
Probably, yes, it is probably being tied, and that would
which
make
would
sense
be
with a quilt
yarn.
with a needle that size. But yeah, just this picture, I was like, oh man, look at that thing.
Yeah, it's I mean it's bigger it would be bigger than sewing with a bobby pin.
Hmm. What I love on this page is where it says many of the quilt makers were taught by an elder within the family or learned from observing other families. Standards are high.
Mm-hmm.
Pauline Whirlwind's mother-in-law made her take apart her first quilt 3 times. I would be like, I am divorcing your son. I am not taking this quilt apart one more time.
Well, and when you think about it too, I would be concerned about like the stability of that quilt if you took it apart that many times. Because I mean, you do see if we're taking stitches out of patchwork that after a while you can only take it out so many times before you really like it's not as sound as it could be, and you could end up with like raveling or depending on the how good your fabric is.
Yeah, well,
Um,
my question is, I mean, was it like she really made her take the whole quilt apart, or was it like, no, take that apart, you know, this one section not good, you know? So it's like, I kind of wonder, did it really mean take the whole quilt apart 3 times? It probably was like take some big section apart multiple times,
I
but
hope so.
nonetheless,
Um,
it's frustrating.
Druid wonders if maybe that needle that she's using is a porcupine quill.
Could be. Um, I do know, like, I have done some jewelry stuff with porcupine quills, and they do tend to be flexible. So I don't know if they would be like going through a quilt, like depending on how, you know, what kind of fabrics are in that quilt, um, might be a challenge. But
Let's say it looks like
yeah.
a decently puffy quilt.
Hmm. So can we talk about the time it's taking? These ladies are reporting the time it takes to make these quilts.
Mhm.
On page 169, right there in the middle in the first column, it says, many quilt makers have mastered piecing and quilting to the point that they can make a quilt in a day or two. Spotted Tail may cut the pieces for a quilt in the morning, sew the quilt top together in the afternoon, and stretch the top on a quilting frame in the evening. By the next day, she completes all the quilting and binds off the edging. Now, I know I hand sew so much that I think often I don't have like, I mean, it just takes me so much longer to do anything just because I hand sew a lot of it. You know,
Well,
when I'm gonna make something bigger, I will pull out the machine and that can be really fast. But I'm just
based
like,
on where she's writing this, on the opposite page are these quilts. So
yes,
like, are these the quilts that we are
no.
piecing and quilting
So,
in
well,
a
right.
day?
So Pearl Spotted Tail, so the four corner star quilt, the orange one, I think,
Mm-hmm.
is hers. And then I think, let's see, it's a couple pages. So page 173. No, I'm sorry. I have her mixed up with somebody else. So never mind. But yeah, I'm like, are we talking about like Pearl? Are you making these star quilts in 2 days? Because
Mm-hmm.
I want what you're
I probably couldn't
drinking
even
or
cut
soaking
out
in.
the star quilt in 2 days.
What?
I probably couldn't even cut out the star quilt in 2 days.
Oh, right? No, exactly. I would just be like,
I hate cutting.
I'm terrible at it.
Cutting
But
is my least favorite
yeah.
part.
Well, and yeah, and I mean it just I question, I mean I'm not saying the lady's a liar, but I'm just like, how? Ma'am, how are you doing this? And I mean, are other people helping her? Because I think we did mention that in a previous chapter that that was the description. They could crank those quilts out because
Mhm.
it was a group of ladies would be like, all right, here we go. And
Yeah, they had like
I have,
assembly line.
yes, and I have seen that happen. My grandmother and her sister quilted quite a bit, and they would do that. They'd be like, she'd bring over her quilt top and be like, all right, you're gonna help me quilt this today. And so yes, when you've got multiple hands, but like one person to do all this stuff in 2 days and it's gonna look like this. I
Right,
mean,
Janet? Janet says she doesn't sleep.
probably not. Probably not. Yeah, so that was one of my questions. The other thing that I thought was really cool is about the importance of veterans. And I mean,
Hmm.
yesterday was Veterans Day.
Yep.
So that was nice to hear this. And it was interesting to know that, those who have been wounded in battle are especially respected. They have the
Hmm.
right to wear a red eagle feather to signify their bravery. I
Hmm.
thought that was really cool.
Hmm.
I know lots of Native Americans do serve in the military, and that was
And
nice to
here's one
hear.
particular star. We were talking about like all these things they do with star quilts. Here's a star quilt that they made for a
Yes.
veteran.
Yeah, and I
It was
love that
very
one. That
interesting.
one's very interesting looking, though, the way it's made. And I glanced at it and I'm like, okay, it's a veteran's quilt. I wanted it to be a bicentennial quilt. I was like, please let it be bicentennial, but no. But it's still just really cool quilt. And I mean, the other one beside it,
Hmm.
that is so interesting.
Yep.
Let me see it. Yeah. That one is really interesting. And then of course the ones that are pictorial, we've seen the TPs and the eagle and um the person in regalia, the war bonnet quilt. Yeah. Very cool stuff. On page 170, this is the one where I was like, Madeline Green. So she likes to work with satin, which I know we've also like that was in previous part of the book talked about satin. But she says, so Green's satin baby quilts are very popular to celebrate birth. She claims it takes me twice as long to work with cotton material than it does to work with satin. Girlfriend, satin is evil fabric. Satin does not want you working with it. And I
It's
mean,
like
look
the
at this
it's like the
this
one quilt
beautiful
that
quilt.
tries to run away while you're sewing it.
Yes, yes. And I mean, but look at this beautiful quilt. This
Yep.
this this is her, Madeline Green. I mean, that's beautiful. And I'm like, ma'am, can you please teach me your wizardry? Because I just can't wrap my head around that. Because that is such a beautiful quilt. I mean, you can really see the quilting. Satin
Hmm.
just like makes the quilting pop. Um,
And those like
so,
star, it almost looks like it's like you can see like this aura, like this, like
mhm.
because of the way the
Yeah,
fabric is moving light.
yeah, absolutely. Also in here, one thing I was disappointed in is they're talking about Gloria Crazy Cat Black Spotted Horse. By the way, freaking cool name. I'm assuming Crazy Cat might be like her maiden name, perhaps, and Black Spotted Horse is Mary. I'm not sure. I may be wrong about that because of the way the names are done, but yeah, that's a cool ass name. But anyway, she makes quilted purses with star patterns, and there's no picture of that.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh man, I'm like, I wonder what they look like. But this quilt here, beside Madeline Green's quilt, is I'm assuming that perhaps they're little purses or tote bags, maybe that use these
Blocks.
smaller stars.
Hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, and then it says miniature eagle star patterns she also makes into purses. So yeah, I thought that was really cool. I would love to have like a purse or a bag or something made with one of these stars. I
Well, I
guess I
mean,
could
you
do it
can look her up and see if you
myself,
can find
but
one.
yeah, yeah. Um, I'm assuming she might be the only person in the US with that name, so hopefully
Yeah.
I can find her. Hopefully she has an Etsy shop. Um, but yeah, I was excited to see that she was, making those. Also, um, split across the two pages, that talk about all the quilts in the collection. One I find especially unique by Marie Looking Horse is red and white with a star design, best described as a combination of the drunkard's path and the mariner's compass patterns. I cannot wrap my head around what that looks like. And I flipped forward in the book
Mhm.
and I don't think it's, I mean, it's not what she's talking about, but definitely not what she's talking about. But I mean, there's one, one of this one star quilt that she's calling a crazy star quilt. Um, this one, but that's not it. That's not what
No.
she's talking about. So I'm kind of bummed. Like that's another one that there's no picture in here.
Hmm.
Um, so that's kind of a bummer. But the other thing under here is the Lakota consider it appropriate to give away items they highly value. It is believed they will always receive back that which they have generously given away. And that's one of those other things that kind of goes along with that the attitude of gratitude, like like I think a lot of times people I'm going to wax philosophical here, but I think people often, you hear a lot about the lack mentality. People are like, I can't share what I have because I may never get another one. This is so valuable.
Scarcity.
Yeah, it's that scarcity. Yes, exactly. That scarcity mentality. Whereas these cultures, their traditions are around be grateful for what you have, share it. It's going to come back to you. And, I think that we end up with that scarcity mentality, that mentality of lack, because not all people in our culture are like that. Not all people in our culture are generous. And so you get that like self-perpetuating cycle of people that like, want to hold tightly to something and not share. Um, and this is such a like opposite thing. And I love it so much. And I just, wouldn't the world be so much better if we could expand these cultures versus, what we're working with today. So, um,
That sounds like a good note to end on.
yeah. And yeah, I think the only other thing I had highlighted here was the sampler star quilt. And I just love that. I mean, oh my gosh, I could totally put that on my bed. Oh, that would look so cool.
I don't want to make it though, because that's a lot of different stars.
Yeah. Well, see, we need oh gosh, what's her name? It's not Madeline Green.
Those
Pearl
ladies,
Spotted Tail.
yeah, we
We
need
need
those
Pearl
ladies.
Spotted Tail because she could whip that out by like tomorrow.
Mhm.
Oh,
True
these ladies are
story.
amazing. These ladies are amazing.
And
So,
as a reminder to anyone that came in late, we finish this book next week, and this is our last book of the year. So it's exciting and bittersweet at the same time, and that
it
means that
is.
for next week on the 19th, we're gonna finish up with 175 to 208. We've spent quite a long time with this book.
Yeah. And I guess what I would say is after, this, I mean, we have a month before the end of the year.
Mhm.
And if there's a book out there that somebody is interested in, you think that other folks would like to read, let us know. I mean, I have a stack, but
Oh yeah, we will never have a hard time finding books to read, but like if there's something that someone else wants
yeah, yeah, for sure.
yeah.
We want to entertain you and
Well, and
not just ourselves.
if there's something that you've been like, I really got to read that book and you need a kick in the pants, and you need friends to read it with you, that would be the reason to be like, hey, as long as it's not Murder at the Quilt Show.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We won't read that a second time.
Yeah, we're not doing Murder at the Quilt Show. And then also remember to come back tomorrow night at 7 p.m. because we're doing needlework nights.
Hooks, needles, uh, shuttles, and
Bobbins
bobbins.
or lace hooks or
Hooky and lacy things.
yeah, things that do things with something. Thread.
Things that manipulate thread and fiber that are not needles, except
Okay.
for knitting needles. We got to think of a better name for that. We'll figure it out by tomorrow.
Yeah,
Um,
right. You heard it here first. I'm gonna ask her, did you come up with a name? And she's gonna be like, oh crap.
And also, don't forget, we are going to be doing the dual stream on Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern with our friend Mia Clift, and we are
Mhm.
going to do a watch party of the AQSG's Material Culture series, the third one.
That's
So
gonna be really fun because she'll be here to tell us other like really cool things about it. So don't miss that.
see you before you know it. Ah, Druid, you're sweet.
Yeah,
All right, guys.
people are gonna
Well,
be sick of us this week.
well, we hope to see you tomorrow. But if not, we hope to see you Thursday. But if not, we hope to see you Sunday for Stitch and Bitch.
Yep.
Oh, I said the bad word.
Well, on that note, then, good night, everybody.
Bye. Have a good night, guys.